everyone. Welcome to our Donkeys and Dragons video chat, where we spend about 15 minutes chatting about a specific topic. Today, we found it a little difficult to sum up our introduction about our guest, James Lyndsay, because we've enjoyed learning from him for so many years. We've had taken workshops from him. We've participated in workshops with him. We've attended his test lab and so many other events. James is a consultant test strategist. Got that right, I think. An international keynote speaker. He's also won many awards, including the 2015 European Tester Excellence Award. He's published widely on software testing, and he's given us a link to a blog post he's just written that kind of touches on what we did today, what we will do today. You can find many exercises and puzzles, and I've tried some of them, not all easy, on his website, because it helps you learn skills like exploratory testing and using LLMs, large language models. So today, James is going to share some ideas to help us experiment, chase down risks, and take toil out of testing. So, there we go. I'm Janet Gregory.
And I'm Lisa Crispin.
And
I'm James.
Hooray, hooray.
I've got my name on my screen.
Yeah,
I've got my name on
you do.
I need to be better at that, don't I?
So, James, you are always way ahead of Janet and me on technology, whether it's the Internet of Things or large language models, as Janet mentioned. And when you kindly agreed to join us here today, you suggested talking about something you call ephemeral tooling. What do you mean by that term?
It's tools you throw away. Sounds terrible. Yeah, tools you throw away. I think it's... we spend a lot of time looking at the return on investment of tools, and if we look at the tiny little tools that as testers we make, we keep throwing them away. So the return on investment is weird, because it seems that some tools are so cheap and rubbish that actually it's easier to remake them than it is to keep them somewhere and find them again and debug them and maintain them if we need them. So there's a whole class of tools out there, we don't really talk about them because we've sort of forgotten to. We look at the great big tools that automate all the things, and we go, yes, that's a testing tool, and we forget about the little things that we write. And I think that there's an inflection point coming, which we'll come to maybe later on. And I think it's worth thinking about these tools that we keep throwing away, and how we can get good at building them so that if we do throw them away, we do rebuild them maybe better next time, or we can think about all the different ways we can build these little ephemeral tools.
Yeah, so, it's kind of interesting, actually, because you talk about throwing them away, and whenever I think about that, I think of prototype. But this isn't really a prototype.
Oh. No, it's not. No, it's not a step on the way to making a better product, because it's not the product. It's a tool to give you what you need as a tester right now. They tend to be very small, very relevant to what you're doing, and then you row them away. They don't turn into anything else. They've served their purpose, like a portaloo or scaffolding. If you destroyed a portaloo once you'd used it once, that doesn't make any sense. But it's a construction tool that you would use while you're building things to help you build something better.
Could you share, maybe you could share some examples? I know you mentioned when we were talking earlier, something about a spreadsheet being used as that kind of tool. Could you share some examples so that it's easier for people to understand why we might use it?
Yes. So everybody uses their own tiny tooling, and it depends on what you've got. And some people are gearheads and they've got lots of tools, and some people don't. But pretty much everybody has Excel or another spreadsheet. Your spreadsheet of choice may be different. You can do this in Sheets or Apple, and don't do it in Apple numbers. So if you've ever taken a bunch of data that's a CSV and you've gone, be bothered, and you put it into Excel and it gives you nice columns out of your CSV, and then you hit filter, and then you hit another filter, and all this stuff you're getting out of your data, suddenly you're using it. Now, The point is not that we save it, because actually that's not how you use Excel, because you're saving the data, the tool that you've got there, this thing where you go, well, I'll make a summary of that one, and I'm going to add these, I'm going to filter those, I'm going to see if I've got any of those and some of those. That exploration is effectively an ephemeral tool, and Excel's got lowish barriers to entry. It's everywhere. I'm sorry, I've said Excel again. Spreadsheets have got lowish barriers to entry because they're everywhere, because they give you immediate feedback, so you get a really good idea about what's actually happening. Because they kind of give you access to commands, and you've got that access to commands without trying very hard. You know, I don't have to think, oh, I'm going to need an interpreter, I need a development environment. Just go, no, I've got a cell, I put an equal sign in it, and now we go. So Excel's got very low barriers to entry, and it's used by all sorts of things. And you can look at it and you go, oh, I don't want to look at this. I just want to take my log and I'll put the first 10,000 rows into Excel, and I'll just slice the date off and I'll do something with it. That's what it gets used for. It's effectively these things we're making. Excel's the tool, but what we're doing is making little ephemeral tools all the time. What I think of about ephemeral tools, because I'm a Unix guy and was a Unix guy. Yeah. But I've got a Mac, so I'm still am a Unix guy in some ways. And one of the reasons that Unix and I gelled is because you can type in sort and then you put the file name and it just gives you it sorted. That kind of thing. So these little tools that exist in Unix are very different from spreadsheets because they're not complicated. They're single purpose tools, but you can start stacking them up. And you can say, right, well, I need to look at this log. I need to look at the end of the log, but the end of the log's flying past me. So I take a tool called tail, and that shows me the end of the log, and that's moving too fast. And I'm going to pipe that through to grep, which filters out some things. And I'm just going to leave that in a terminal flickering away. And I'm going to look over. Oh, hang on, I've got a new one in there. So that's what I think of as an ephemeral tool.
It's interesting because I've never thought of them that way before, and those are tools that I've used in so many ways, but I really like naming them as a tool to be able to use to help test.
Yeah.
Thank you. As I interrupted you.
That's all right. No, it's fine. I'm very glad to be interrupted because I'm going on. Yeah, I think it's nice to think of them as a tool, because you can think, well, actually, what do I do with do I keep my tools in a bucket? Do I tell other people how I use my tools? How do I sharpen my tools? How do I get better at making them? Do I actually need to have them completely ephemeral? Or can I have a little set of Unix snippets around the place which I can share? You can stick it on a web page somewhere and you put little tools in. So yeah, tools that we can build for our own purposes tend to be ephemeral. And then hello cat, I can see a tail. Not an enormous donkey head coming through the window. So or indeed dragon head in Arizona, I don't know if they still have them there. Right, so we've done all the animals. I'll shut up. It's interesting when we look at these ephemeral tools because we're building them for a purpose and we're thinking about what we want, and there's slight extension of our brains, and then we move on to the next thing. We've got a hint out of these things that we know we can just about trust. We can't really trust it. We're never, ever going to put an ephemeral tool into production, not because it's a bad idea. It is a bad idea, but because it stops being an ephemeral tool. Make sense?
Right.
So yeah, it's not an ephemeral. Put it into production. It's not an ephemeral tool. It's clearly gone permanent. Equally, there's a whole bunch of tools that we write that are trouble finding tools that stay in the system. I've got a bunch of sanity checkers, and you write them and they're looking at the data. You go, just check that one for sanity. And it goes, you got 3 of those, you should have just 2. That kind of thing. That's also not an ephemeral tool. Ephemeral tool, you make it, you throw it away.
Throw it away.
And I think that's where we're going now. So spreadsheets are good, and chains of stuff in Unix are good, and little tiny scripting languages things are good, and indeed GitHub has gists for that very thing. So but the world's just changed, of course, and 2024 saw the rise of the LLM. And
there we go. Let's talk about that. Lisa, do you have a question about LLMs? Because I know James has so many things to talk about.
Well, these tools that you're talking about, for me, they're like, oh, we're familiar with these tools, and it's easier for us, low bar, to use them to help us with our testing, our exploring. So now Gen AI tools, LLMs, they're hopefully new tools in our toolbox that we are familiar with. But a lot of us aren't really very well versed in the best ways to use them, and we know there are lots of pitfalls. Just been in the workshops I've joined that you've given, James, it's like, oh my God, the bad things that could happen. Can you give us some examples of how we can use them? Maybe one or two examples of a way we can use them safely and avoid the pitfalls and feel comfortable, like we do feel comfortable with a spreadsheet or whatever.
It's three of those, and so safely reducing the pitfalls and feeling comfortable. Feeling comfortable, for me, only comes through messing about, and that's so I do see what I do as ultimately, thankfully, I just follow what's interesting. Ultimately, in work as in everything else, and you end up finding neat stuff. But if you give people interesting things to do, then they go through that same path. And then they start to feel comfortable as well. So my advice for comfort is play. In terms of risk, well, just a few months ago, I gave a workshop where we were running code that the LLM gave us, and we ran it without checking the code first in order to see if it would pass its tests. And that's fine, except it's not fine if you're not in a protected environment. And I wasn't doing that on anybody's machine. We were working in Replit. But of course, if your LLM has been compromised and you say, give me code, let us see if this code passes our tests by running the code. And what that code does is and kills things from your machine or elsewhere. You've kind of opened yourself to a bit of a quandary. So I don't know of a safe way unless you put it, as I'm doing now, on a server which doesn't have access to much else. But let's rewind a bit, because the trick with an LLM, because it's good at language and they're predictive things. If they've seen something before, they can kind of do it again. Ultimately, an LLM for me is kind of like it's a compression algorithm. It's an extraordinarily weird and just out of this world compression algorithm where you say, show me this thing, and it can, and it's got all sorts of different ways that it's compressed stuff down. So if you say, show me this thing, it will show you something that's plausibly that. And what it's good at is language, and code is a very specific, limited, syntactically correct kind of thing. So LLMs are good at code, and they're good at small tools, and they're good at small code, and they're good at demo stuff. They're good at, and that's exactly what you need for a temporary tool. So you can turn to, and I have turned to, an LLM and say, I want to find a risk. Now, I'm not going to ask you, the LLM, to find that risk, because I think that's crazy. I don't think LLMs do judgment. I think they can look like they do judgment, but I don't think they do judgment. We might do judgment. They don't. But what they can do is give you a way in so that you can exercise your judgment. So if I say to an LLM, I've got a function here. This function, it's quite a complicated thing. It's got lots of ins, it's got lots of outs, it's got lots of states going on inside. And I would love to have a testing interface for that. I'd love to have a web page, maybe. A web page maybe, which will interface to whatever technology this is in, and a web page may be that, I don't know, lets me input stuff, generates some test data for me, looks at the output, lets me look at the output, lets me slide things around so I can do it in real time. I'd like one of those for a function, please. And in the past, I've written those for me, and that's one of the ways that I explore. And now I don't have to, because I turn to Claude, which is extraordinary, and I say, Claude, give me an interface that does this. And even better, give me an interface that uses this template, which I already have for another interaction with Claude, that says, all right, here's a section for all your environmental variables. Here's a section for all the inputs with the defaults, and you can squiggle things about. Here's a section for putting rubbish in. Here's a section for getting things out. Here's a section for real-time input. Here's a section for... It's all just there. And you say, give me one of those. And it does.
Just like that.
Yeah. Now, this is an ephemeral... Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No. So it is an ephemeral tool because you do throw it away.
Yeah. Because when somebody gives me the next round of the function, I don't want to go back to this complicated thing that the AI built based on my template. I want to say to the AI and the template and the prompt maybe that I used before and say, give us another one.
Okay. So how do you see that, these tools like that, changing our jobs as testers? I can think of a couple of ways, but do you have a couple ideas how that would change our jobs? I can't say our jobs anymore as a tester since I'm retired. Tesco. It's amazing.
Once a tester, always a tester,
Always a
Janet.
tester. I know.
No, I think you can take Janet out of testing briefly, but you can't really take testing out of Janet. So my guess is, I guess it's anybody's guess because the world is very weird right now.
Yes.
What I think is happening for me in my tiny coding practice is I'm recommending thinking about experiments more. And I'm recommending thinking about experiments not simply in terms of what you can do, but this tool gives you the ability to do an experiment you hadn't thought of. So think out of the box with the experiments. For years, I've been trying to say to people, you put one value in, you get one value out, is not a good way to explore. It's a very boring, slow way to explore. It's okay in that you get to think about it quite a lot. You put one value in, you get one value out, but it's just so much easier to put in 1,000 values.
Yes.
And then to work through it. And that's what we can do. And we can have things that will look through it, and we can have things that can trigger it, and we can think of different experiments. I'm going to give you an example of a tiny ephemeral tool I made. I had a router, so given a network, it would say from here to here, it takes this time, but this is the shortest distance, and this is the least points. And sometimes all those three things are going to be different, and it's necessary they're different. I couldn't think how to test it, not algorithmically. I mean, I could think of ways to give it different, very small networks, and I think that's the way I would have recommended doing it, is have an exploratory data set that contained the stuff I was looking for. But instead, I just wrote a tool, and as it happens, I didn't use an LLM to write that tool, but I would because it was a little while ago. So I would have a tool that generated data sets, and that would take very little time to write. I'd have another part of the tool that would feed it to the thing. I'd have another part of the tool that took the thing out and said, right, I want all those data sets for which the distance is different from the route for the shortest distance is different from the route for the shortest time, is different from the shortest number of points. That's what I'd do. And it would give me those, and then I could explore those. And then what I could do is say, right, this is a small network, and I believe it's working with my small network. Now I can scale that up to be not 10 points, but 100 points or 1,000 points. So those are the experiments we can do now that we couldn't do before, because we can automate. And we can automate newly because suddenly code is even cheaper than it was before. And when code is cheap, that return on investment that we look at when we're saying, can I throw away a tool? That becomes very strange, because suddenly the investment becomes very small.
It's not so high.
Yeah, divide by zero, we don't know what happens. So I think it's an interesting time. We're looking at reducing our investment in code very low, and that means temporary tools are cool, and we'll see where we go with testers.
And that is going to be a very good place for us to stop.
Kind of mind-blowing, really. So I have to go off and think more about this.
No, and when I start talking to a guest and I go, 15 minutes is up, long time, I go, too fast. But thank you very much. So Lisa, can you put our contact information up so that we can sign off? We thank you very much, James, for being with us today. But please do subscribe to our channel, our newsletter. We have new content every month. Don't forget to check out our blog posts. And on the end of this, on the show notes on this video, we will include the blog post that James has written all about ephemeral. Okay, I'm not even going to say it because I'll say it.
Ephemeral tooling.
There we go. Thank you, James. So
thank you so much. It's such a great concept, and it's such a great great new drawer in our toolbox.
I hope it gets people going, oh, hang on, I can do that. I've got an LLM on my desktop. I've got Copilot. It's just It's so interesting to go, hang on, let me give my software something real to chew on and see where it goes. It's just fascinating. Those tools, how you make those tools is enabling, but ultimately what's interesting is what you make with them to push your system, and then what your system becomes, which hopefully is higher quality.
All right. Thanks very much, and we'll see you all.
See you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.